June 10, 1942. The early morning skies over the English Channel shimmered in a pale blue haze as 12 Spitfires from RAF No. 65 Squadron roared into formation. Their mission was routine, or at least it was supposed to be. A low-level reconnaissance flight over the northern coast of France to photograph German coastal installations near Dieppe and Boulogne. By all accounts, the squadron departed RAF Tangmere at 0600 hours under clear skies, confident, experienced, and well-prepared. None of the men who took off that morning were ever seen again. At this point in the war, Britain's Royal Air Force had become the shield of the nation and, increasingly, its sword. The Spitfire, with its graceful elliptical wings and Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, was the pride of British engineering, an aircraft that symbolized defiance and precision. No. 65 Squadron, nicknamed East India Squadron, had flown in the Battle of Britain 2 years earlier and had since taken on more aggressive duties: coastal strikes, escort missions, and reconnaissance over occupied Europe. The men were veterans. Squadron leader Peter Maddox, just 27, was among the youngest to command a frontline unit. His leadership was marked by calm professionalism, his logbooks meticulous, his debriefs brief and measured. The briefing that morning was simple. Photographic run along the French coast, grid E17 to F23, recalled a ground crewman later. In and out before the Jerrys could scramble. The weather was favorable, visibility 20 miles, low wind. A standard mission. Yet within 2 hours, the entire flight would vanish somewhere over the channel, leaving no trace, no radio message, and no survivors. The first sign that something was wrong came just after 0730. Radar stations along the southern coast tracked the squadron's progress outbound, but noted anomalies on the return leg. The blips flickered, faded, and then disappeared entirely. Operators at RAF Beachy Head assumed it was interference or altitude loss. But when Tangmere tried to raise the aircraft on radio, there was only static. Within minutes, Flight Control realized that 12 of their best pilots had gone silent. Search and rescue aircraft were scrambled from Shoreham and Ford, sweeping the channel between New Haven and the French coast. Not a single patch of oil, not a wingtip, nothing, one pilot reported. The waters were calm that morning, the visibility good. It was as if the squadron had flown into the clouds and never come out. For the ground crews back at Tangmere, the tension was unbearable. Hours passed with no word. Mechanics stood idle beside fuel trucks, waiting for the sound of Merlin engines that never returned. "We kept checking the horizon," one recalled. Every few minutes someone would say, "There they are," but it was always a cloud, a bird, or wishful thinking. That evening, Wing Commander Harold Beecham arrived from Group Headquarters to begin the first of many inquiries. Beecham was a meticulous officer, known for his unflinching attention to detail. He examined the mission plan, weather data, and maintenance logs. Every aircraft had been serviced and cleared. The pilots were in good health and well rested. There were no indications of mechanical faults. 12 machines do not simply disappear, Beecham wrote in his first report. Something interfered, something we do not yet understand. The incident drew quiet attention from higher command. The RAF was wary of panic or rumors, particularly after several similar vanishing episodes involving lone reconnaissance aircraft in recent months. Some suspected German night fighters had developed new radar techniques to ambush British planes returning home. Others whispered about secret Luftwaffe jamming operations, distortions in magnetic and radio fields that could mislead aircraft over open water. A passage from the diary of one of Maddox's fellow officers, written days after the disappearance, captured the unease that gripped the base. "Peter always said the channel could turn on you, calm 1 minute, haunted the next. We fly over it every day, but we never really see what's beneath." Perhaps that's where they are now, just out of sight, still flying. In the days that followed, the search expanded to include naval patrols and coastal observation posts in Kent and Sussex. Reports trickled in: an oil slick near the Goodwin Sands, an unconfirmed sighting of wreckage off Dieppe, but none proved credible. The official report, filed June 16, listed the cause as presumed combat loss. Yet no German records, radar intercepts, or eyewitness accounts supported that explanation. Even Luftwaffe pilots later interrogated after the war denied any engagement that day. The disappearance of No. 65 Squadron became a quiet riddle within RAF circles. Families received telegrams marked "missing in action," but little else. For the men who remained at Tangmere, it was a chilling reminder of how thin the line was between a successful mission and utter oblivion. The Spitfire, so often a symbol of victory, had, in this case, simply vanished into the fog of war. In later interviews, one mechanic admitted he kept Maddox's leather flying gloves, left behind on the wing of his aircraft before takeoff. "He forgot them that morning," he said softly. Funny, the one thing he left behind was the only thing that came back. As the sun set over the channel that week, the coastline remained deceptively peaceful. Seagulls wheeled over calm waters where 12 of Britain's finest pilots had disappeared without a trace. The official story would soon give way to deeper investigations, ones that hinted at technologies, secrets, and experiments the public would not learn about for decades. The mystery of the vanished Spitfire squadron had only just begun. The morning after the disappearance, the mood at RAF Tangmere was heavy and silent. The base that usually hummed with a clatter of mechanics and the roar of engines now stood still, every man watching the skies as if the missing Spitfires might yet appear through the haze. Wing Commander Harold Beecham convened his team in the operations hut, maps unfolded, grease pencils in hand, and a single unanswered question on everyone's mind: how could 12 of the RAF's best simply vanish? Beecham was no stranger to the unpredictable chaos of aerial warfare. A veteran of Dunkirk and the Battle of Britain, he'd seen squadrons decimated in minutes. But this was different. There had been no radio contact, no distress call, no enemy engagement logged by fighter command. "Men don't just fall off the radar," he told his intelligence officer, Flight Lieutenant Robert Keane. "Something interfered. And I mean to find out what." The investigation began with the flight logs. Beecham reviewed the final entries, each pilot's last recorded note from the previous night. Squadron leader Peter Maddox had written simply, "Low recon, Boulogne to Dieppe. Good weather. Should be routine." The same confidence echoed through every entry. Routine. Yet somewhere over the channel, that routine had dissolved into silence. Reports from radar operators along the coast painted an unsettling picture. The squadron's outbound flight had been tracked cleanly, the return leg less so. At approximately 0728 hours, signals began to distort. Blips flickering, one operator at Beachy Head recalled. Looked like interference, but it wasn't weather. For 2 minutes, radar contact became erratic, then vanished altogether. No enemy jamming was reported, and German intercept logs later revealed no hostile activity in the area. Beecham widened his inquiry. He spoke to pilots from neighboring squadrons who had flown over the channel in recent weeks. Their accounts were eerily similar. Compasses spinning out of alignment. Radios cutting out for no apparent reason. "It felt like flying through a pocket of dead air," said one pilot from No. 602 Squadron. "You'd lose your bearings, your instruments would flicker, then suddenly everything would come back online." The RAF dismissed most of these reports as isolated technical faults. But Beecham wasn't convinced. He turned next to the maintenance crews. Each of the missing Spitfires had undergone standard pre-flight checks. Engines, fuel, radios, all cleared. Chief Mechanic Arthur Sims was adamant, not one of those machines should have failed. "We'd flown them hard, yes, but they were sound. If something went wrong up there, it wasn't because of us." As the inquiry deepened, whispers began circulating among intelligence staff. Bletchley Park had recently intercepted fragments of Luftwaffe transmissions referring to something called Nebelnetz, the fog net. Analysts weren't sure what it meant, but the term appeared in communications from radar research stations near Calais and Boulogne, the very region the missing squadron had been photographing. Could the Germans have developed a new type of radar countermeasure? One capable of confusing Allied instruments or scrambling communications. Beecham took the information seriously. He contacted Air Marshal Lee Mallory, head of Fighter Command, and requested intelligence cooperation. The reply came quickly but cryptically. Continue investigation at station level. No higher escalation necessary. It was the RAF's way of keeping the matter quiet. The war was full of secrets, and Britain's radar advantage was one of its most closely guarded. Meanwhile, tension at Tangmere grew. Families began writing letters, desperate for answers. Fellow pilots volunteered for extra channel patrols, hoping to spot wreckage or floating debris. But the sea offered nothing. "It's like they flew into another world," one sergeant muttered as he gazed at the endless water. In his personal journal, Beecham recorded his growing frustration. "There are forces at work here I cannot explain. Technical, perhaps experimental. The channel seems alive with interference." Maddox and his men were no fools. If they went silent, it was not by choice. A week later, the search was scaled back. Officially, the Air Ministry declared the squadron lost due to probable combat or navigational failure. Unofficially, Beecham continued digging. He traveled to coastal radar stations, interviewing operators late into the night. One technician near Dover mentioned seeing a ripple on his scope, a faint distortion, as though the air itself had bent the signal. Another at Ventnor spoke of zones of silence, where radio contact would fade inexplicably. To modern ears, these accounts might sound like early descriptions of electronic warfare, a concept barely understood at the time. In 1942, both sides were experimenting with radar, countermeasures, and deception techniques. The British had perfected radar detection. The Germans were racing to counter it. The air above the channel had become an invisible battleground of signals and frequencies, one where a small shift could mean life or death. For Beecham, this invisible war was personal now. "We're fighting ghosts," he confided to Keane. "Not men in planes, signals, interference, shadows." By the end of June, Tangmere had returned to a fragile routine. New squadrons rotated in, new missions launched. But the space on the duty board where number 65 Squadron's name once stood remained blank. The ground crews still kept their hangar swept, as if expecting their aircraft to taxi in at any moment. Before filing his final interim report, Beecham stood on the edge of the runway one dusk evening, watching the sun sink into the channel. The water glimmered in gold and blood-red hues. Somewhere out there, he knew, lay the answer, but the sea wasn't talking. As he turned back toward headquarters, a messenger approached with an urgent note from Group Command. New intelligence from Bletchley Park had just arrived, intercepted Enigma fragments mentioning a successful test of signal concealment off the French coast, on the very day the squadron disappeared. Beecham read the message twice, folded it carefully, and slipped it into his coat pocket. "So it wasn't the weather," he murmured. "And it wasn't luck." The investigation was no longer a search for wreckage. It had become a hunt for truth, one buried beneath layers of secrecy, deception, and the unseen war of signals that would shape the rest of the conflict. By July 1942, the disappearance of No. 65 Squadron had shifted from a local mystery to a quiet but pressing concern in the upper circles of British intelligence. At Bletchley Park, codebreakers working through endless Enigma intercepts noticed a pattern, a series of Luftwaffe messages from the Pas-de-Calais region referencing Phase 2 of Nebelnetz. The term appeared repeatedly in communications between radar command centers at Cap Gris-Nez and Boulogne-sur-Mer, the same corridor over which the Spitfire squadron had vanished. Nebelnetz, literally fognet, was believed to be a German project focused on radar interference and aerial deception. British analysts had suspected the existence of such experiments for months, but no direct evidence had ever surfaced until now. The timing was too precise to ignore. The intercepted messages were dated June 10, the very morning the 12 Spitfires disappeared. Wing Commander Beecham was summoned to London for a discreet meeting at the Air Ministry. In a dimly lit room beneath Whitehall, he was greeted by two men in plain suits, MI6 liaison officers from the Scientific Intelligence Division. They had been monitoring German radar research closely. One, Commander Reginald Lawson, briefed him curtly. "The Germans are working on a system designed to distort our radar reflections and scramble navigational bearings. If your squadron vanished within that sector, it's likely they flew straight into a live test." Beecham was stunned. "You're saying they were victims of an experiment?" Lawson nodded gravely. Possibly, though the Luftwaffe may not have realized the full effects themselves. Their goal was to confuse, not destroy. But interference on that scale could easily disorient a formation flying low over open sea. MI6 had intercepted more than just code words. One decrypted message, sent from a Luftwaffe radar site near Wissant, read, "Nebelnetz operational. Full field engaged. Allied formation entered area. Signal loss observed. Results successful." No aircraft were mentioned by type or number. But the timing matched perfectly. Back at Tangmere, Beecham shared little of what he'd learned. Official secrecy orders bound him tightly. To the men under his command, the loss remained unexplained operational failure. But in private, he began piecing together a troubling hypothesis. If the Germans had indeed developed a method of distorting electromagnetic signals, then radar, compasses, and radios could all be rendered useless within the affected zone. In effect, an aircraft could lose all sense of direction, flying blind until fuel ran out. He reviewed the squadron's planned route again. The flight path would have taken them directly through the suspected test area between Cap Gris-Nez and Boulogne. If the interference had been strong enough, it might have created a dead zone extending over the channel itself. They would have thought they were heading home, Beecham mused aloud to Keane, when in fact they were flying deeper into danger. Keane, the younger of the two, stared at the map in silence. "Then the question isn't what happened, sir," he said at last. "It's why we didn't know it was happening." Bletchley's findings remained top secret, and only a handful of officers were briefed. The British had their own radar countermeasure projects underway, most notably Window, strips of aluminum foil dropped to confuse enemy radar. But where Window was designed to deceive visually, Nebelnetz appeared to target navigation itself. The implications were profound. If Germany had found a way to disrupt Allied instruments, every flight over occupied Europe could be at risk. Among the few surviving documents from Beecham's personal notes, one entry stands out. "War is not just fought with bullets and bombs anymore, it's fought in the invisible spectrum. The air is full of ghosts, signals, echoes, illusions. Perhaps our men flew into one that day." Meanwhile, rumors spread quietly across RAF bases. Pilots whispered of ghost zones over the channel where compasses spun wildly and radios crackled with foreign voices. Officially, these tales were dismissed as nervous superstition. Unofficially, Air Intelligence logged every report. In a debrief years later, one radar operator recalled hearing Beecham mutter under his breath, "They didn't crash, they were swallowed by silence." It wasn't poetic exaggeration. To him, the silence was literal, the loss of all electromagnetic contact, the cutting of every thread that tied man and machine to the world below. For modern historians, Nebelnetz stands as one of the earliest known experiments in electronic warfare. At the time, however, it was shrouded in secrecy. Allied codebreakers continued to monitor the term for months, but after July 1942, it disappeared from German communications entirely. Whether the project was deemed too dangerous, or its side effects too unpredictable, remains unknown. Beecham's official report, classified Most Secret, was filed in August. It concluded, "Evidence suggests interference of electromagnetic origin may have affected Squadron 65. No wreckage recovered. Probability of enemy experimentation high. Further investigation required." But no further investigation came. The Air Ministry shelved the file, citing operational priorities and the ongoing Dieppe raid preparations. To the public, the loss of the squadron remained an unfortunate mystery. Before leaving London, Beecham paused on the steps of the ministry, staring at the grey sky above Whitehall. The hum of the city faded into the background as he turned to his aide. "If we've entered a war where air, light, and sound can be used as weapons," he said quietly, "then none of us are truly safe, not even in clear skies." What he didn't yet know was that within months, fragments of the missing aircraft would resurface, raising even deeper questions about what really happened in the skies above the channel. By the autumn of 1942, months after the vanishing of No. 65 Squadron, most at RAF Tangmere had resigned themselves to the grim conclusion that the men were gone for good. The war had moved on, Dieppe had been raided and bloodily repelled, new operations loomed in North Africa. But for those who had known squadron leader Peter Maddox and his pilots, the mystery refused to fade. Then, one gray morning in October, word reached Tangmere that changed everything. Fishermen off the French coast near Dieppe had recovered debris bearing unmistakable RAF markings. The news was cautiously relayed through naval intelligence channels and confirmed by a neutral intermediary in Vichy, France. A small wooden trawler, Le Fer du Nord, had hauled in twisted metal and fragments of fuselage while dragging nets along the shallow seabed. Among the debris was a section of aircraft skin painted in the dull camouflage green of a Spitfire, with part of a serial number still visible, BL 980. It was one of Maddox's. Beecham was summoned back into the investigation immediately. By now he had been reassigned to administrative duties, but he pushed for authorization to examine the recovered fragments. The remains were transferred secretly via resistance contacts through neutral Spain and eventually to Gibraltar, where British technicians could inspect them. When the report came back to London, it raised more questions than it answered. The debris showed no evidence of gunfire, no burn marks, no explosive damage. Instead, the metal appeared warped and torn, as though the aircraft had disintegrated under extreme pressure. The pattern of deformation baffled engineers. "It's as if the structure failed midair," noted one analyst from the Royal Aircraft Establishment. "No enemy damage, no collision, just catastrophic failure." The mystery deepened when examination revealed that the aluminum skin had microscopic pitting, similar to what might occur from high-frequency electrical discharge. Beecham reviewed every photograph, every technical note. He'd seen planes shot down, burned, or smashed on landing, but never something like this. "Machines don't just come apart in clean skies," he told one investigator. "Either the pilots were flying into something we didn't understand, or something unseen tore through them." The RAF quietly ordered further testing of Spitfire airframes for structural weaknesses, but none were found. Every report ended with the same uneasy phrase, "external factors indeterminate." To avoid public panic, the discovery of the wreckage was classified and kept out of the press. Families were told nothing. It was around this time that Beecham received a letter from Flight Lieutenant Robert Keane, who had since been posted to a new command. Keane wrote, "I still dream of that morning, sir. The calm sky, the hum of the Merlins. Sometimes I wonder if we've lost more than just men. Perhaps we've lost understanding of what the air can do when we fill it with our signals, our noise, our war." Meanwhile, inside the RAF's Radar Research Division, engineers began privately debating whether electromagnetic interference could create localized atmospheric anomalies, fields capable of disrupting both instruments and aircraft integrity. A few brave scientists suggested that powerful jamming transmissions, if tuned improperly, might generate oscillations that could affect aircraft systems or even stress the airframe itself. Officially, this theory was dismissed as speculative nonsense. Unofficially, Beecham filed it away. For the rest of that year, whispers of the Tangmere vanishings spread among pilots and ground crews alike. Some refused to fly low-level missions across the channel. Others reported strange radio flickers over the same route, short bursts of static followed by eerie silence. "It's like flying through an invisible curtain," one pilot noted after returning from a recon flight near Boulogne. By early 1943, the Air Ministry sealed the investigation. The official conclusion, quietly circulated among senior officers, read, "Probable cause, mechanical failure under duress. Contributing factors unknown. No evidence of enemy action." Beecham's reaction was immediate. "Nonsense," he scrawled in the margin of his copy. "We've buried the truth to protect our secrets." He wasn't entirely wrong. Documents unearthed decades later revealed that during that same month, Allied scientists at Malvern and Farnborough had been testing their own versions of radar countermeasures, some of which produced unintended interference strong enough to cause temporary instrument blackout. The Air Ministry, eager to conceal its experiments, had little interest in publicizing a case that might expose both sides' electronic warfare programs. But Beecham could not shake the image of Maddox's squadron vanishing into clear skies. When interviewed years later, long after the war, he recalled standing on the cliffs near Tangmere one evening in '43, watching the clouds drift westward. The sea was calm, the wind low, and for a moment I thought I heard the faint echo of engines, 12 of them, flying in formation. Then it was gone. Even among the cold logic of post-war reports, the emotional weight of those missing men lingered. For the families, closure never came. For Beecham, the wreckage only confirmed what he already feared, that the squadron had not simply crashed, but had been caught in the invisible crossfire of a secret technological war. As the classified files were locked away in ministry archives, a single note from Beecham's final correspondence with MI6 hinted at what would come next. If any of our aircraft were torn apart not by bullets or weather, but by the air itself, then we've entered a new kind of war. One waged in silence, unseen, and without mercy. And yet, one puzzle remained. The recovered fragments accounted for only one plane. 11 others were still missing, along with their pilots. The channel, silent as ever, guarded its secrets. But the sea would not stay quiet forever. In the years ahead, divers would uncover a clue that would reopen the mystery of the vanished squadron once more. 3 decades passed before the mystery of No. 65 Squadron resurfaced in the public record. By the 1970s, Britain was awash in post-war revelations, Enigma, Ultra, and the declassified archives of the Air Ministry. Historians, journalists, and veterans groups combed through once sealed files, searching for forgotten stories. It was among those yellowing folders that the case of the Tangmere vanishings quietly re-emerged, filed under Unexplained Air Losses, June 1942. The rediscovery would challenge official history and reopen questions long buried beneath national secrecy. The file was thin but telling, 26 pages of technical notes, radio transcripts, and Beecham's handwritten marginalia. Most of it was mundane, weather logs, radar charts, fuel calculations, but 2 pages stood out. One was stamped Most Secret, Eyes Only, and referenced possible interference consistent with enemy radar countermeasures. The other, dated August 1942, bore a single line heavily redacted, Further inquiry deemed against national interest. When researchers at the Imperial War Museum obtained partial access to the file, the missing squadron became the subject of renewed speculation. Aviation historians noted the timing, June 1942, just weeks before Operation Jubilee, the disastrous Allied raid on Dieppe. Could Maddox's mission have been part of preliminary intelligence for the raid? And if so, had the squadron stumbled into a German radar experiment meant to conceal coastal defenses? The hypothesis gained traction. One retired signals officer, interviewed in a 1975 BBC documentary, suggested that nebelnets may have been linked to an early form of radar masking used by the Kriegsmarine. It was not meant to destroy aircraft, he said, but to hide what was on the ground. If the RAF flew too close during a test, their instruments might have been overwhelmed. For the first time, Beecham's name appeared publicly in connection with the case. Now in his late 70s, living quietly in Sussex, he agreed to a single interview. His recollections were precise but cautious. "We knew something was off with the radar returns," he admitted, but the political climate didn't allow further digging. The ministry wanted closure, not questions. Asked if he believed German technology was responsible, Beecham paused. "I believe our men were victims of a war fought not in the sky, but in the airwaves. And at the time, no one truly understood what we were playing with." The public fascination grew. Newspaper articles speculated about Britain's lost squadron, comparing it to wartime myths like the disappearance of Flight 19 years later. Conspiracy theorists claimed experimental Allied radar trials had interfered with the Spitfire's instruments, forcing the government to cover it up. Others maintained the loss had simply been an accident of navigation. But among aviation experts, the technical evidence, the warping of metal, the absence of enemy fire, remained deeply unsettling. Declassified correspondence from the Air Ministry revealed internal debate. One memo, dated March 1943, read, "Possible intersection between RAF trials of Project Window and German signal interference cannot be dismissed. However, disclosure would compromise ongoing research." The ministry had chosen silence over truth, burying the case to protect both sides' electronic warfare secrets. For modern analysts, that decision is understandable. The Allies' radar countermeasure programs were among the most valuable assets of the war. Any public admission that such research could have caused friendly losses would have been politically explosive. Yet morally, the silence weighed heavily on those who knew. "It's the burden of secret wars," one historian later wrote. Those who fought them could never tell the families what really happened. Among those families, the pain lingered longest. In 1977, Peter Maddox's younger sister, Elizabeth, petitioned the Ministry of Defense for access to her brother's records. She received a short letter in reply: "No further information available beyond the original findings of 1942. Attached was a faded photograph of Maddox in uniform, smiling, confident, forever young. To this day, no official amendment has been made to the squadron's loss report. The men remain listed as missing in action, presumed dead." But the re-examination of the case changed something fundamental. It reframed the story not as a tragic accident, but as an early casualty of the invisible battles of science and secrecy that defined modern warfare. A final note in Beecham's personal journal, discovered after his death in 1979, summed it up with quiet resignation: "We were fighting a war that bent the very air around us. The enemy was not always across the channel. It was sometimes in the signal, the static, the silence. Our boys didn't vanish by fate. They flew into the future before any of us could understand it." The reopened investigation did not solve the mystery, but it revealed its larger meaning: that progress in war is never without ghosts, and that some victories are bought at the cost of truth itself. Still, one unanswered question haunted every researcher who touched the file: if only one Spitfire fragment was ever found, where were the rest? That question would not remain unanswered for long. The sea, after 30 years of quiet, was about to yield one more secret. It was the summer of 1981 when the Channel finally gave up one of its secrets. A team of civilian divers, mapping the seabed near Cap Gris-Nez for a French marine archaeology project, stumbled upon the rusting remnants of an aircraft engine, half buried, encrusted with barnacles, but unmistakably of British origin. The team leader, Jean-Claude Lefebvre, described the moment vividly: "It looked almost alive, like a sleeping thing. We knew immediately it wasn't a fishing trawler or shipwreck. It was too compact, too engineered." The discovery caught the attention of both French maritime authorities and the RAF's historical branch. After weeks of delicate recovery, the serial numbers were revealed: Merlin 45, number 29788. When cross-checked against wartime production logs, it matched one aircraft, Spitfire BL-982, flown by Flight Lieutenant Harold "Hal" Preston, one of the 12 men from Maddox's lost squadron. For the first time in nearly 40 years, a tangible piece of the mystery had resurfaced. Yet it only deepened the enigma. The engine's resting place lay miles north of the squadron's recorded return path, far closer to the German-occupied coast than to England. The implications were staggering. The Spitfire had not turned for home as planned. It had veered off course, flying deep into enemy waters before disappearing entirely. Investigators from both nations examined the engine at a secure naval facility in Cherbourg. There were no signs of battle damage, no evidence of fire or explosive force. Metallurgical tests suggested the propeller had not been spinning at the moment of impact, implying fuel starvation or power loss. But why would all 12 aircraft suffer the same fate simultaneously? British aviation historian Dr. Andrew Cartwright, who later studied the case, offered a haunting explanation. If the Nebelnetz field extended farther than either side anticipated, the pilots' instruments might have been showing false bearings. They could have believed they were flying northwest toward home when in fact they were drifting northeast, straight toward the French coast. Radar and navigation in 1942 were still in their infancy. The Spitfire MKV carried only a basic radio compass and relied heavily on visual cues and dead reckoning. At low altitude over open water, a small navigational error could become fatal. But the eerie precision of the squadron's simultaneous disappearance suggested something more than human mistake. In a documentary aired in 1984, surviving RAF veterans reflected on the rediscovery. "We all felt it," one pilot said. "That could have been any of us. One wrong vector, one bad frequency, and you were gone." Another added, "It wasn't enemy fire that took them. It was the fog of signals, the kind no one could see. The recovered engine was eventually shipped to England, cleaned, and placed on display at the Tangmere Military Aviation Museum. A small plaque beneath it reads, "Recovered from the Channel, 1981. Believed to be from Spitfire BL 982, number 65 Squadron. Lost June 10, 1942. In memory of those who did not return." Visitors often stop and stare at it in silence. The corroded metal, the twisted pipes, the faint outlines of the Rolls-Royce logo, all seem to whisper the story of the men who vanished into the skies above the Channel. Though many have tried, no definitive explanation has ever been confirmed. Some point to nebelnets and early radar jamming. Others argue for navigational drift or sudden mechanical failure. A few suggest an unrecorded Allied countermeasure test may have interfered with their instruments. Whatever the cause, one fact remains: 12 Spitfires left Tangmere that morning, not one returned. In the years since, researchers have continued to probe the Channel floor, using sonar and submersible drones. A few scattered fragments, wing spars, a gun sight, and a tattered section of fabric have been recovered. None have revealed the full picture. The sea, as it always does, keeps its counsel. Standing by the recovered engine at Tangmere, an aging veteran once remarked to a reporter, "They say the sea forgets. I don't think it does. It just waits until we're ready to listen." Today, the story of the vanished RAF Spitfire Squadron stands as one of the most enduring mysteries of the Second World War. A story of courage, technology, and the unseen frontiers of a new kind of warfare. It reminds us that in 1942, the battle for the skies was not only fought with bullets and steel, but with invisible forces that bent light, sound, and reason itself. And somewhere, far beneath the waves of the Channel, perhaps the rest of Maddox's squadron still lies, engines silent, wings folded, bearing witness to a chapter of history that remains half told. The fog of war, it seems, never truly lifts.